Hello. Hello. Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the second annual Dr. Hugh Sadler Memorial Lecture. We're so thrilled that you've braved the weather and are spending this evening with us for such an important occasion. My name is Noah Schultz-Bayard, and I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Australia Institute. The Australia Institute is proud to be one of the country's foremost leading reputational and influential think tanks in the country. We put on important events like this, like the Hugh Sadler Memorial Lecture, to share our research and to communicate with the public about important issues. And we can't do that work without the support of amazing people like you who come to our events. We're an independent think tank. It means that we don't take any funding from any level of government, which frees us up to be as frank and honest as we like to be. But it means that our support and our ability to remain independent comes from you. I'll talk a little bit more at the end of the event about how you can support us and maintain that independence and our flow of research that matters. But for now, I want to introduce someone very special. I want to introduce Uncle Major Moogie Sumner AM for a welcome to country. Uncle Moogie is a world-renowned performer and cultural ambassador of Ngarrindjeri arts, crafts, martial arts and traditional culture. He's a strong supporter of innovative art and has featured in many media productions and cultural collaborations. He serves as a Ngarrindjeri Regional Authority board member, as a board member of Black Dance Australia, and as the artistic director of the Talkinjeri Dance Group. Please help me in welcoming Uncle Moogie Sumner to the stage.
Thank you. I don't have to live up to all that now. Now, what I'd like to do before we start, I'd like to invite our ancestors here to be with us. My ancestors, your ancestors, wherever you come from. Invite them here to come and sit next to you, to be a part of this meeting, to walk with you, to be here. Walkandi Rikai Rumai Falka Ngariri Pakanamutanu, Ngariri Pangari, Lewan Ganarui. 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 Ngariri Pakanamutanu, Koron Warren Pangari, Ngopan. Ngariri Pakanamutanu, Koron Warren Pangari, Ngopan. Ngariri Pakanamutanu, Koron Warren Pangari, Ngopan. What I said, I asked the ancestors from the four directions to come here and sit down in the land of the Ghana people, the land of my mother. The song was to welcome you and your ancestors here to this land. The words at the end was asking them to take away any negative energy that comes with us as we travel across the land. Ask them to take that away so that We have a good night here tonight. We look after each other, but enjoy each other's company. On behalf of my mother's people and my people, the Ghana people, I welcome you and your ancestors here to this land. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Uncle Moogie. Beautifully said, as always, and it's always so nice to be able to receive a warm welcome such as that. Just briefly on the format for this evening, we'll hear shortly from a member of Hugh's family about his legacy and his connections to this state and this city. And then we will move on to the lecture from our special guest, Mike Rann, before having, at the end, a brief period of in-conversation between myself and Mike before we wrap at 7 o'clock. But I did want to say that it really is an honour for us at the Australia Institute to be able to host these memorial lectures in honour and in memory of our friend and colleague, Dr. Hugh Sadler. I want to recognise that we have many members of Hugh's family with us here this evening, including Hugh's wife of 50 years, Marilyn, and his son, Harry, who have come all the way from Canberra, and many others who have travelled from around, and many who are also based here in Adelaide. It's an honour to be able to put this event on in Hugh's home city and to be able to be discussing such an important subject. So thank you all for being here. But like I said, our first speaker tonight will be representing Hugh's family, and I'd like to introduce Alex Roos. Alex is one of Hugh's nephews, the son of Hugh's sister Christabel. He studied languages and politics with a particular interest in environmental politics and policy, and as a new graduate, he briefly worked with Hugh and Marilyn at Energy Strategies before changing course completely to pursue a career as a professional musician. So please help me in welcoming Alex Roos to the stage.
Thanks very much, Noah. Thank you, Uncle Moogie. Good evening, everyone. I'm honoured to have been invited to speak on behalf of Hugh's family this evening. It is, as Noah said, very fitting that the second annual Dr. Hugh Sadler Memorial Lecture is being delivered in Adelaide, where Hugh was born and raised. When preparing this introduction, I was mindful of what the ANU's tribute to him called his generosity in sharing his insights. At home, this generosity was most often evident when he was asked a relatively straightforward question, and the answer would invariably start with, "Well, it's not really as simple as that." So I apologise to those present for any superfluous explanations that may follow, and to Hugh for oversimplifying some of the complexities of his life. Hugh's significant contribution to energy, economics, and climate change research and policy are very well known, but his early scientific interests were in botany. He grew up across the road from Ferguson Park, which is a smallish patch of remnant bushland that's significant because of its place between the sandstone of the Adelaide Hills and the clay of the plains, and the consequent biodiversity within the park, particularly its flora. Both Hugh's parents were involved in the local conservation group that looked after Ferguson Park, although in the spirit of generosity, I should point out that this was very much an informal arrangement, and the Friends of Ferguson Park wasn't actually established until 1982. And long before the wetland across the road was created, some of you may know it as being just near Saints Girls, the creek running through it was managed by my grandfather, Hugh's father, to prevent further damage from the intermittent flows coming down the creek. So environmentalism and close connection to the land started very early for Hugh. It's no wonder that he took an interest in conservation and botany with such active parents. and he never let that interest wane. I remember vividly, specifically his interest in botany, one Christmas in Canberra, when our post-Christmas dinner walk was not simply a stroll in the park, as it usually was, but rather a vigorous quest to find specimens of button wrinklewort. It's a low-growing native with small yellow flowers that looks remarkably like a lot of other small native plants with yellow flowers. We did find one, but I think Hugh was hoping for more. It's an endangered species, and I think Hugh had found one already, which is why we were all co-opted into finding some more. I presume it was in order to take a survey of the state and extent of the population. I don't know how much further he got with that particular research. At the time we teased him about it, but in hindsight I recognised that the leader of our quest was not my Renaissance man uncle, but the little boy that fell in love with the native flora in Ferguson Park, a love that he pursued until the end. As well as the park on his doorstep, of course, Hugh enjoyed many camping trips, both with the family and through his involvement with the Scouts, often to the Flinders Ranges and further afield to the Grampians and all over the place. But, of course, it wasn't all hiking and camping growing up. Hugh's formal education obviously started here in Adelaide too. He attended St Peter's College, where he won pretty much every prize and scholarship available, and held leadership positions in multiple clubs and societies, not only scientific, but also literary. Mum often reminisces about going into Mem Hall as a teenager and an adult and feeling so proud to see her big brother's name on almost every honour board in there. As anyone who knew him as an adult will attest, Hugh wore his knowledge and his wisdom lightly, and so much of the impact of his professional life was achieved in gentle conversations and thoughtful advice. Both of his sisters assure me, however, that this was not always the case when he was at school. But I suppose big brothers will be big brothers and teenagers will be teenagers. After school, he went to the University of Adelaide, just a stone's throw from here, for his undergraduate studies in biology. And from thence to Cambridge, where, if memory serves me correctly, he did his prize-winning PhD in biophysics, before biophysics was even a thing. And of course, the rest is, as they say, history. On behalf of the whole family, I'd like to say that we're all so proud of Hugh and what he achieved. And we hope that this lecture and those in years to come will stand as significant contributions to the climate change and environmental policy conversation. Thank you very much.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the whole family for being here with us this evening. So our speaker tonight, delivering the Dr. Hugh Sadler Memorial Lecture, is the Honourable Mike Rann AC. Mike is chair of the UK Climate Group and served as the Premier of South Australia from 2002 to 2011. He was also Australia's first Minister for Climate Change and one of the first people anywhere in the world to hold a position with that title. When he became Premier in 2002, South Australia had zero renewable energy. And we know that the story is very different today with an abundance of wind and solar in our jurisdiction. Mike has held a broad range of positions, including as Australia's High Commissioner to the UK, and currently divides his time between Europe, the US and Australia, advancing climate ambition at a global level. Tonight, Mike will discuss the politics of climate ambition, the importance of courage in formulating climate policy, and lessons from South Australia's renewable energy transformation. Please help me in welcoming the Honourable Mike Rann to the stage.
Thank you very much, Noah, and to Hugh's family. It's a great honour to give a lecture in his name and also honouring his legacy in doing so. to my very old friend Moogie Sumner, who I've known for about 40 odd years, I think, maybe longer, and also to some distinguished guests here tonight, particularly pleased to acknowledge Anne Levy, a former president of the Legislative Council and a wonderful inspiration for women in politics in South Australia. Vinnie Ciccarello, former Mayor of Norwood and former Member of Parliament for Norwood, but distinguished guests all. Look, it's a great privilege to give this lecture honouring the enduring legacy of Hugh, particularly in the presence of his loving family and many friends, at an event hosted by the Australia Institute, where Hugh was a founding director, serving on its board for 2 decades. I didn't know Hugh personally, but anyone involved in environmental policy and climate policy in Australia felt his influence. In many ways, Hugh became a key intellectual anchor of Australia's embrace of a net zero future. And he was that anchor at times when the sea was roughest, with bitter attacks on the very existence of climate change by those beholden to the fossil fuel lobby. Hugh persisted when the science of climate change was described by one Australian Prime Minister as absolute crap, and then we saw the spectacle of another waving a chunk of coal around during question time saying, "Don't be afraid, don't be scared, it won't hurt you." During the worst of times, including the bitter debates over carbon tax and emissions trading, the rigour of Hugh's research and analysis and his calm, plain-speaking style helped those committed to climate action hold their course. Very importantly, Hugh's research contributed to the development of the Australian energy market's integrated system plan, a global benchmark planning tool for energy systems transitioning towards 100% renewables. Hugh did big things, but at every step of the way, he remained a most generous colleague, teacher, and mentor. He was greatly admired and loved. Now, one of the great privileges of my life was at the age of 24 to be recruited from Auckland to work for Don Dunstan and his government. In his public and private life, Don was defined by the word courage, the theme of my talk this evening. In the 19th century, South Australia had established itself as a laboratory for reform, including workers' rights, enfranchising Aboriginal men in 1856, and then in 1894 becoming one of the first places in the world to enfranchise women and enable them to run for Parliament. For more than a decade, until his sad resignation from Parliament in early 79, Don reignited that reform leadership for South Australia. The Dunstan era saw a policy agenda that led Australia, particularly in widening democracy, civil liberties advances such as anti-discrimination laws, homosexual law reform, Aboriginal land rights, and his years of championing a new concept of multiculturalism. Now, shortly after Don died in 1999, an academic paying tribute said Don Dunstan was a statesman, not a poll-driven, partisan politician obsessed with staying in office. She clearly didn't know him because Don was very partisan, and he loathed the cold citadels of privilege and prejudice that had held back equality of opportunity in Australia for so long. Don was also perhaps the first political leader in Australia to use opinion polls, certainly one of the first. He told me that it was important to win at least 3 elections in a row in order to embed lasting reform rather than seeing them quickly overturned by subsequent Conservative governments. Don used polling to help him sell his reform agenda, not to tell him what to do. Faced with an often hostile print media, he mastered television to punch through his message. His example tells us that leaders have to lead, but in doing so have to stay in touch with those who are leading, and very importantly, he showed us that policy bravery can be politically popular. His government kept winning election after election. So what about today? Anthony Albanese deserves great credit for honouring his commitment to hold a constitutional referendum for an Indigenous voice to Parliament. His campaign wasn't successful, and to be honest, the referendum's defeat became likely when the opposition decided to oppose it. But Albanese didn't throw in the towel. The Prime Minister kept going, even though he knew he would lose more than paint politically if the referendum failed. He kept his promise to First Nations people, and in doing so faced a well-financed, lurid and at times racist No campaign, which brought out the worst in Australia. Our much touted tradition of mateship took a battering, and the Prime Minister's authority was for a while diminished. Ironically, the Prime Minister also deserves credit for his bravery in breaking a pre-election pledge to honour the Morrison government's Stage 3 tax cuts. He reviewed and ultimately reneged on that promise, a most painful process politically, because it was clearly in the interest of the majority of Australians to do so. So Anthony Albanese copped it for breaking his word on tax cuts for the wealthy, just as he copped it for keeping his word on the voice. And the Prime Minister was pretty much written off by many political commentators at the end of 2024, but went on to win a smashing record victory for Labor in the history of Australia. The majority of Australians could see who a coalition government would benefit, and it wasn't them. So they took the phone off the hook on Peter Dutton, and it's still off the hook with his successors. With brewing leadership tensions and a forward-to-the-past debate over climate policy, it's quite clear that the coalition still hasn't worked out why they lost so badly at the last federal election. So in a second term with a big majority, where and when should political bravery resurface? In late 2026, the 31st United Nations Climate Conference of the Parties will hopefully be held in Australia, and if it does, Adelaide will be the host city of what will be known as the Pacific COP. Now, COPs are prestigious, and the tens of thousands of visitors who descend on a host city for several weeks provide a welcome economic boost. For Adelaide, hosting a COP will eclipse the economic impact and international profile of any event in this city's history. But we've got to remember that COPs are messy, with their climate outcomes mostly disappointing, with only incremental progress registered each year in the final text that has to be agreed by close to 200 nations. Now, every COP attracts a swarm of many hundreds of fossil fuel lobbyists corralling delegates. Politicians might say that they can't be bought, but over the years some have clearly been rented when donations were big enough. Last year, 1,773 registered fossil fuel lobbyists attended COP29 in Baku. This lobby has learned from the tobacco industry's tactics. It knows that denying man-made climate change is no longer credible. Their mission then is simply to delay climate action to allow fossil fuel industries to continue to make profits from the damage they do. We saw this formula played out in the last federal election. The coalition's Nuclear Power Stations for All pledge was a hoax. It was really about stalling the rollout of renewables to allow coal and gas-fueled power stations to continue as long as possible in the lead-up to the 2050 net zero deadline. The problem for the opposition's election strategy was that the real-life experience of Australians with climate change, in terms of record temperatures, massive and repeated floods, the fiercest bushfires, and a looming insurance crisis, is now matching the persistent warnings of the scientists over the years. For Australia, the adverse consequences of climate change are no longer a distant glimpse of the future because it's happening right now. At a series of COPs, the fossil fuel lobby have fought hard to prevent the internationally agreed text issued at the end of each conference from laying the blame for climate change on fossil fuels, or even worse, prescribing a timetable for their phasing out. It's not just countries like Saudi Arabia leading the charge to frustrate climate action. Amongst the battalions of lobbyists are those representing companies wholly owned by governments who publicly tell a different story. They will be coming to COP31 desperate to avoid any commitments to phase out the cause of the problem that threatens billions of people on our planet. For the Australian fossil fuel industry, maintaining an ongoing bipartisan commitment to gas exploration, production, and almost tax-free exports is their central objective. They've been doing very well so far, and for fossil fuel polluters, gas seems to have become the lifeline that vaping was for the tobacco lobby. Now, in addition to the lobbyists, there will be a large number of climate NGOs and protesters who've been frustrated by recent COPs being held in less democratic oil and gas-rich nations, where demonstrators would not be well received, let alone well treated. So at COP31, Australia's climate credentials will be under the closest scrutiny. Under coalition governments, Australia was seen as on a par with the worst on climate action, along with first-term Trump's America, Bolsonaro's Brazil, and Middle Eastern oil states. So I'm not surprised at all today, and there'll be more tomorrow, that in opposition they now want to turn their backs on science and raise the white flag on Australia's future. The opposition's fossil fuel donors call the shots, and Susan Lay's leadership is on the slippery slope to oblivion. The Albanese government is seen as better, more mainstream than its predecessors, with Australia's recently announced nationally determined commitments, our carbon reduction targets, being judged internationally as better than expected. Australia also gets considerable credit for its commitment to 30 by 30, an international campaign spearheaded by the Campaign for Nature, for nations to announce high levels of environmental protection for 30% of their lands and waters by 2030. So Australia's move to protect vast areas of our sub-Antarctic islands and oceans has been acclaimed internationally. Now, I want to acknowledge Chris Bowen's energetic leadership as Federal Minister for Climate Change and Energy. He had a hell of a lot of ground to make up. And I was just recently in New York at Climate Week, and I saw firsthand how hard he's working to secure COP31 for Adelaide. So is the state government, so is Jane Lomax-Smith, who's now in Brazil advocating for this city. I particularly commend his $2.3 billion Cheaper Home Batteries program, which provides an upfront discount of around 30% on eligible home battery systems. The program aims to install 1 million home batteries by 2030, and as of Friday last week, 113,267 home batteries have been installed since July 1 this year. About 1,000 systems are being installed every day. This is a game changer for the grid, and not only because of the welcome reductions to home energy bills. The program allows households to harness the power of rooftop solar when it's abundant in the middle of the day, but when many people are not at home, to utilise it, and time shift that usage to the evening peak, when homes would otherwise be reliant on power from fossil fuel generation. This reduces demand in the evening peak, lowering costs for everyone, and creates a more stable grid overall. However, Australia's continued approval of new and expanded coal mines and its massive embrace of a gas industry continuing well beyond 2050 means that Australia is often seen internationally as walking both sides of the street on climate, even though the current government is light years ahead of its predecessors on climate and energy. For an Australian COP to be a real success, I hope the Albanese government will announce that it will stop approving new or expanded coal mines. I hope it will detail its timetable to phase out coal-powered electricity. It's got to be frank with the Australian people about whether it sees gas as a transition fuel to a net zero future or as something more. The Albanese government, I hope, will also unveil a serious upgrade of Australia's environmental protection laws, not legislation that looks good but has got loopholes. I, like many others, hope that serious tax reform will also be embraced in this term of government. And like the Australia Institute, I'm appalled that multinational gas companies are making massive multi-billion-dollar profits from exporting Australian resources while paying little tax. Fixing this could be a big step in a second-term tax reform agenda. Our Pacific Island neighbours have often registered their unhappiness with Australia's addiction to fossil fuels, given the existential threat of climate change to low-lying nations. Despite their concerns, Pacific nations have strongly backed Australia's campaign to host COP31. I chaired a meeting of Pacific Island leaders in New York recently, which was attended by Chris Bowen and also by Kevin Rudd. A bigger commitment by Australia at the COP in Adelaide to assist Pacific nations with nature-based projects on land and sea will be important for them and for Australia's credibility. It would be seen as a real Pacific dividend from COP31 for our neighbours that goes beyond the text of the final communique. Bravery in climate leadership could well be a defining legacy for Anthony Albanese's Prime Ministership, just as Medicare was for Bob Hawke, compulsory superannuation for Paul Keating, and the apology to Indigenous Australians for Kevin Rudd. Now, locally, it is absolutely appropriate that COP31 is being held in Adelaide. No other Australian state comes anywhere near close to South Australia in terms of climate action. Advised by Tim Flannery and brilliant thinkers in residence such as Herbert Girardet and Stephen Schneider, my government set out on the long road to reduce our ecological footprint and embrace a renewable energy future. We started with public education, with a series of high-profile initiatives, solar powering prominent buildings, the Parliament, Adelaide Airport, the Art Gallery Museum, the new pavilion at the Wayville Showgrounds, and a large number of schools. And we did other things, like insisting on plumbed rainwater tanks for new homes, insisting on higher environmental energy ratings for buildings leased by the government. And we also planted 3 million native trees in a series of urban forests to shade, cool and beautify Adelaide and its suburbs. But most of all, we were hungry for energy companies to choose South Australia for their renewable energy investments. We achieved this not by handing out hundreds of millions of dollars, but by making the regulatory environment much easier than in other states. This paid off, giving us a first user advantage. We caught the other states napping. And for some considerable time, South Australia, with around 7% of Australia's population, secured well over 50% and at times 60% of Australia's wind power investment, worth billions of dollars and giving a big boost to our regional communities. I want to particularly acknowledge, by the way, the role of our former Commissioner for Renewable Energy, Professor Tim O'Loughlin, with his leadership. Our government was the first in Australia to legislate for a feed-in tariff to drive the rapid take-up of household solar. Today, around 1 in 2 South Australian homes have installed solar panels. In 2007, we passed another Australia first, the Climate Change and Greenhouse Emissions Reduction Act. This was the first legislation in the world to set a 2050 target, along with its interim targets for the percentage of renewably powered electricity and for emissions reductions. I mean, at that time, any government could commit to a 2050 target knowing that they wouldn't be around, maybe not even alive, to face the music. Weak leaders could leave it to their successors to make the hard decisions. Tough interim targets set in law make governments accountable along the way. I am so pleased that successive premiers have ensured a continuation of South Australia's leadership. Jay Weatherill secured what was then the world's biggest battery to ensure grid stability, more batteries to follow. And last year, the government of Peter Malinauskas significantly upgraded our Climate Change and Emissions Reduction Act, strengthening and bringing forward our state's targets. So where are we at? By 2027, 100% of South Australia's electricity will be generated by renewables. And by 2030, we will likely have reduced our emissions by more than 60% compared to 2005 levels. These achievements are world-leading. It hasn't been a smooth ride, with scare campaigns designed to derail progress. But the good news is that South Australians liked what was happening. They enjoyed and enjoy their state being a leader again, just as they did under Don Dunstan's leadership. Policy bravery was again popular. Labor was in office for a record 16 years, and after 4 years out has come back with renewed vigour on climate, energy and other fronts. And that's why I'm particularly excited about the prospect of COP being held here. We will obviously put on a great show for visitors, but more importantly, we'll be able to showcase from our own experience how the energy transition can work. So one of my key messages today is that there's a real difference between whipped up noise and genuine public opinion. I'll give you an example. When I announced that we would be the first state, one of the first jurisdictions in the world to ban the use of non-renewable plastic bags, retailers and commentators said it would damage business and cost jobs. I was told that it would be unpopular with shoppers. It wasn't. Polls showed it had the support of 80% of South Australians. Retailers who complained about the legislation were soon boasting about their green credentials. At the time, all the other states rejected embracing the same plastic bag ban. They're now on board, but let's remember it took 49 years for the rest of Australia to follow Don Dunstan's container deposit legislation because of scare campaigns that said it would damage the booze and soft drink industry. So unfortunately, it's too easy for governments to be spooked by loud or well-funded lobby groups, even though they do not come close to representing majority opinion. Now, as Noah mentioned, these days I'm the chair of the Climate Group in the UK and globally. Our membership includes a large number of subnational governments and more than 400 major corporations. In this capacity, I'm often asked whether I'm optimistic about the world reaching net zero by 2050, and these questions have increased tenfold since the election of Donald Trump. In late September, I attended Climate Week in New York, which the Climate Group hosts each year alongside the UN General Assembly. I was worried that the Trump factor would make corporations reluctant to attend in case they were targeted for punishment for doing so. However, it was a stellar Climate Week with the best ever business and subnational involvement and engagement. We hosted 1,007 events across New York. The quiet message from business is that they remain committed to achieving net zero because it makes business sense for them to do so. And in doing so, they are responding to consumer demand. And I received the same continuity message from state governments attending Climate Week. The Climate Group has around 185 subnational governments spread across every continent, with a strong representation of US states, including California, fourth largest economy in the world, bigger economy than either Japan's or the UK's. It's estimated that around 70% of the decisions made that affect renewable energy are made at the subnational level. On every continent, states and regions are acting as a goad to action to their national governments, just as we did. In New York, the states and regions were absolutely clear that they were resolved to getting on with the job. So getting back to the question I'm always asked, am I optimistic or pessimistic about reaching net zero on time? It's true that last week the World Meteorological Organization confirmed that greenhouse gas emissions have risen to a record high, sort of slowing down but still a record high. 2025 is also on track to be the second or third warmest year ever recorded, with all of the 10 hottest years in measured history occurring during the past decade. It's true that the UN Secretary General warned last week that the goal of the Paris Climate Agreement to limit heating to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels has failed. It's now sort of heading towards 2.6. It's also true that the adverse impacts of climate change, including catastrophic weather events, are arriving more quickly and more damagingly than originally predicted. So my answer to the question I'm most often asked is that I'm cautiously optimistic. Why? Because there's recently been a positive tipping point. Massive levels of investment are now flowing more strongly into decarbonisation. Globally, around twice as much investment is now flowing into renewables and other clean energy technologies compared to fossil fuels. In 2025, total clean energy investment is expected to be around $2.2 trillion compared with total investment in coal, oil and natural gas expected to be around 1.1 trillion. In 2004, when South Australia first began to embrace a renewable future, it took 1 year for the world to add a single gigawatt of solar power. Today it's doing that every single day, every day. Now, I agree with Nicholas Stern, the former chief economist of the World Bank, that climate action is the economic growth story of the 21st century. Recently, he pointed out what every investor knows, that it is much smarter to invest in the technologies of the 21st century rather than those of the 19th and 20th century. Innovation drives growth. And I haven't yet met a successful business leader who boasted to me about grasping a last mover advantage. Lord Stern headed the UK's landmark review of the economics of climate change. He concluded that climate change was the greatest market failure the world has ever seen. In a recent interview, however, he said that the economic opportunities climate action presented had also intensified due to the extraordinary pace of technological development. The cost of solar power and batteries have fallen 80% in the last decade, with offshore wind costs down 73% and onshore wind down 57%. And he said in this interview, plummeting costs of clean technologies from renewable energy to electric cars, plus the healthier and more productive societies they enable, meant that investments could simultaneously tackle the climate crisis and faltering economic growth and bring millions of people out of poverty. Now, recent figures from the International Energy Agency have also encouraged my optimism. Global renewable energy power capacity is expected to double between now and 2030, 5 years, increasing by a massive 4,600 gigawatts. China is the pace setter, and earlier this week the New York Times reported that China installed more wind and solar panels last year than the rest of the world combined. It is now likely to achieve its ambitious 2035 wind and solar targets 5 years ahead of schedule. It is now making more money exporting green technology than the US makes from exporting fossil fuels. India, another big emitter, is also on track to become the second largest growth market for renewables, with capacity set to rise by 2.5 times in 5 years. So what does this mean in terms of meeting global targets, particularly given the setback of the US again withdrawing from the Paris Agreement? In 2023, at the COP in Dubai, the nations of the world together pledged to triple the global use of renewable energy by 2030 in order to remain on schedule to reach net zero by 2050. At our current rate of growth, we would fall short with an increase of 2.6 times. However, even some energy hardheads believe that a 2.8 time increase is still possible by the 2030 deadline. Not quite enough to reach the target, but not far off the threefold increase required. And one of the big stars, of course, is the EU. At Climate Week in New York, I welcomed one of our keynote speakers, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who there pledged that the EU would stay the course on the multi-trillion euro European Green Deal she initiated in 2020, with its central commitment to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. That's political courage. We have to ensure that our continent, Australia, matches them, and we can all be proud that South Australia has led and continues to lead the charge and is now being recognised for that leadership at conferences all around the world. Closing, I'd like to thank the Australia Institute for inaugurating these lectures, honouring Hugh Sadler's intellectual leadership of the climate debate in Australia. I would also like to commend the Institute for its provocative thought leadership around some of the big policy questions facing Australia. For years, when coalition governments were in power nationally, the Australia Institute held Prime Ministers, ministers and bureaucrats to account. It is doing the same today with Labor governments, and that's healthy for democracy. Given the deteriorating media landscape in Australia and a social media environment where facts, science or civil discourse are too often jettisoned in favour of noise, prejudice, abuse and extremism, we need organisations like the Australia Institute to keep us focused on the real issues facing our nation's future. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Wow. Well, thank you, Mike, for the kind words and for that fantastic speech, drawing on really quite extraordinary insight and experience that you've gathered over the decades. And it's quite an interesting time to be talking about climate politics in Australia. You mentioned in the speech the news today out of the Liberal Party and their abandonment of net zero by 2050. It seems a very strange decision for them to have made. It seems as though the path back to government for them must go through the seats lost to the Teals, which makes today's decision quite confusing to someone like me. But with your experience, can you explain, is there some galaxy brain 3D chess move going on here that us mere mortals just can't see?
It's called, what it is the exact reverse of what we talked about Don. It's absolute cowardice. I mean, their donors have won, and their donors have scared the daylights out of the National Party, and then of course you've now got a situation. And also, I mean, in addition to that, is the fact that the right wing of the Liberal Party, supported by the National Party, basically wants to get rid of Susan Ley, and quite frankly, she's, as I've said, on the slippery slope to oblivion. I think she will last slightly longer than Alexander Downer's record 8 months, but probably not much longer than that.
Will she outlast the lettuce? That's what everyone's wondering.
The lettuce. It's interesting that Noah's referring to Liz Truss, how long, which was a sort of 48 days or something as Prime Minister of Britain. I thought it was very amusing that she was being advised by senior Liberals from Australia in terms of a strategy to regenerate the economy, which ended in a monumental disaster.
Absolutely. We've got so much to get through. You touched on so many important points in your speech. But, you know, we've talked about the Liberals and where they're at today. On the other side of politics, we have the Albanese government desperately trying to secure the UN COP for Australia and for Adelaide for 2026. How do you think the campaign for an Adelaide COP is going? What are our chances, do you think?
I think still pretty good. Just to explain it to those that might not know, it's a bizarre process. So Australia and New Zealand are part of the UN regional grouping known as Western Europe and others. Canada's in it. The US is an observer, although they won't be there because they've decided to bow out. Israel's in it as well. So in New York, essentially, what I was being briefed about was this overwhelming support within the UN, overwhelming support within the Western Europe WEOG group for Australia to host. But the problem is, under fairly arcane UN rules, the other bidder, which is Turkey, has to concede. And if they, so really it doesn't matter. I mean, all these Pacific Island groups, it was fantastic they were supporting us, but despite criticisms of Australia, but ultimately the only vote that really counts is Turkey's. But if it doesn't, if there's a deadlock, what happens? I mean, this should have been announced a year ago. If there's a deadlock, it flicks to Bonn in Germany. Now, I'm told that neither Bonn nor Germany wants it. So that could be the next. So lobbying negotiations are going on right now, and people are getting from a whole range of countries are getting very frustrated by it, but absolutely overwhelming support for Australia to host the COP.
Do you think that the fact that Germany and Bonn don't want to host it, and that Australia has the overwhelming majority of support, do you think that puts us in a strong position to get it?
I think the fact that Germany doesn't want it does, yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly what I'm being told. But, you know, you have to sift through, in New York, sift through the rumours. But that was pretty much, I was getting that from a whole range of sources.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that before. So you were here for the hot scoop this evening. You mentioned the role of fossil fuel lobbyists in COP. Yeah. And you didn't mince words when it came to the gas lobby. Comparing them to the tobacco lobby and taking from their playbook. What do these lobbyists actually do at a COP, and what can be done to prevent COPs, all COPs, including future COP in Adelaide, from becoming exercises in greenwashing?
Well, I mean, it would be really good to not allow them. I mean, essentially, they just want to get hold of any delegate and try to convince them. I'm going to be polite here. Convince them to say, look, not yet. You know, great idea, but not yet. And they're constantly promising that there's a new solution. I mean, I got this when I was Premier. On, you know, a number of people from various energy organisations were saying to me, and by the way, there were some were very supportive, particularly about what we were doing to get wind power up and running. But others were saying, look, you don't need to be quite so, aggressive about this, because there's going to be carbon capture and storage just around the corner. That was in 2004, I was being told that. And that's exactly the line that is being used today.
in the press conference announcing the decision, the Liberal energy spokesperson said carbon capture and storage is going to be the centrepiece. It's just around the corner. It's always just around the corner, isn't it? You mention. Well, actually, it's interesting that you say that we shouldn't have fossil fuel lobbyists at the COP. A little plug for the Australia Institute. We have a petition on our website currently calling for the banning of fossil fuel lobbyists at any COP to be held in Australia. We've got nearly 10,000 signatures on that petition. If you go to our website, australiainstitute.org.au, you can sign that petition. And from the sounds of it, you might be open to signing that petition yourself.
I'm happy to sign.
Oh, fantastic. All right, I'll sign you up after this. Appreciate that. You mentioned in your speech your admiration for some of the EU Green New Deal and the work that's going on there. Can you expand on that just briefly for us?
Their commitment, in terms of the democratic world, their commitment is sort of unparalleled. And it's easier for President Xi in China to insist what's going to happen, and they're doing some amazing things. But you think about what the European Commission has to deal with. It's got 27 nations with 27 parliaments, 27 governments, constantly changing, going from left to right, right to left, whatever. And then also you've got the European Parliament with, I think, 730 members of Parliament. You've also got, they have to negotiate with the European Council, which is the 28 prime ministers. So to commit to what they've committed to and to get them to stay the course is absolutely extraordinary. I've got some figures. We haven't got time. I gave us a big speech of an hour long about what the European Union were doing, but just in terms of transport alone, they've got a situation where transport causes about 25% of the EU's total greenhouse gas emissions. The Green Deal lays a path for a 90% reduction in transport emissions by 2050. Central to this strategy is shifting 75% of all the goods now transported by road around Europe to rail and water. And to achieve this is requiring, they're spending $1 trillion a year on all of this. Requires a huge investment to assure its transport corridors, ports and rail infrastructure are fit for purpose. And then they're also going to plant 1 billion trees. Their farm to fork strategy, massive changes to way that farms conduct themselves in terms of the climate and the environment. But the emissions trading scheme of the EU, which focuses mainly on power generation and heavy industry, in 2023 the emissions were 47% lower than in 2005. And we're talking about a massive industrial complex. So, could go on and on and on, but I just think that it's an extraordinary negotiation achievement to herd all of those cats in the EU to get a commitment and to stick to it.
Fascinating. It's a good example of why you might be carefully optimistic, seeing action on that scale in the world right now. It's pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
I regret to say that an hour flies when you're hearing such interesting perspectives as this, but we are running out of time, or effectively we have run out of time. I'll get to thank yous in just a second, but like I said in my opening remarks, the Australia Institute is proud to be one of the country's most influential and trusted public policy think tanks. We produce high impact research, we produce research that matters, and we do that because of the support of people like you who come to our events. We have a short video that we want to play now, just over a minute long, looking back at some of our influence over the last 18 months, and then we'll have a brief thank yous before we wrap up today. So if we could play that video.
A think tank, a group, looking at the overarching principles. One of the things that makes it special is that it encompasses all the issues confronting Australia.
The Australia Institute, it's revealed that 2/3 of people in this country believe corruption is common.
The Australia Institute shows 90% support for rules around truth in political advertising.
Well, more than half of the gas exported from Australia is royalty-free, according to research from think tank the Australia Institute.
The Australia Institute.
The Australia Institute.
The Australia Institute.
In Norway, they tax their fossil fuel industry and give their kids free university education. In Australia, we subsidise the fossil fuel industry and we charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. Tell me politics is boring.
The question isn't whether Australia has the capacity to lead with integrity. The question is whether the people in this building have the courage to do it.
Poverty is a policy choice. These are things that can be addressed. We know how to do them.
We do have the right to have some hubris because we should all be hoping for better.
Industry in Australia, households in Australia want cheaper gas. All Labor have to do is make one group sad, the foreign-owned gas industry.
We can have a really big influence on rebuilding or building the institutions of international law after Donald Trump has dismantled them.
This great submarine deal is almost certainly going to result in us having no submarines. It's a terrible, terrible mistake.
Government has to change its view.
Destruction of native forests.
Australia is one of the biggest consumers of fashion per capita in the world.
Climate integrity.
A whistleblower protection authority.
Record profits and price gouging.
To have institutions like the Australia Institute doing original research that underpins the arguments of those who want to reconstitute the dream of democracy, that is the greatest gift to anyone who wants to keep the idea of democracy alive.
Wow, what an organisation, the Australia Institute. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's a privilege to work at the Australia Institute, to be a director there. And if you do want to support our work, my colleague Pamela, who you would have seen at the registration desk, she is available to talk to you about making a donation to the Institute and our work, and she has a tap and go with her if you wanted to make a donation this evening. The only other thing that I wanted to plug was that we recently launched Australia Institute Press, where we have our own printing press now and are releasing quarterly essays and publishing books. We have available for pre-sale now on our website, australiainstitute.org.au, a book that we'll be releasing in December, just in time for Christmas, called A Time for Bravery. This is a collection of essays from leading Australian and international thinkers about the importance of the role of bravery in policy formation and specifically in politics. It was the subject of Mike's speech tonight, and I'm pleased to say that we have contributions for this essay series from Yanis Varoufakis, from Barry Cassidy, from Craig Foster, and from Mike Rann. Mike has contributed a chapter to the book, so it's available for pre-sale currently on our website, and I think it's an inspiring read if you are able to get your hands on it. But that does unfortunately bring us to the end of this evening. I just wanted to say again thank you to Mike Rann for delivering this, our second Hugh Sadler Memorial Lecture, and for sharing your invaluable insights and experience from decades in this space and the crucial work that you do. Thank you also to Marilyn and all the members of Hugh's family who are with us tonight and that helped to put this event on. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. These events wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you braving the weather to be with us. You've helped us create a space for this important conversation that I'm hoping we will be able to carry on. So on that note, thank you again. Have a good night. Be safe, look after each other, and enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.